Hold on, let's click here. Giving a voice to the older player of digital games, which in the literature typically starts with the 50-plus-year-old demographic, which is obviously not that old, but you know, you have to start somewhere. So since I'm assuming that there's a lot of students here tonight, let me start with one of my favorite quotes regarding this topic, which was by one of my own professors when I was doing my PhD way back. And that goes a little bit like this. So it goes, don't waste your time. Older adults don't play games, and certainly not enough of them do for you to do a PhD on, which was super helpful, right? Well, actually, it kind of was because I learned one of the most important lessons that you can ever learn. Even people that are renowned experts in their fields, people that you respect and look up to, they can still be pretty wrong about things. And if you want to form your own opinion and do your own research to figure out what you want to do. And well, I mean, I felt while I was preparing for this, it's a little awkward to say, but unfortunately these days I feel like you kind of have to say that. That does mean that you want to, do proper research, gather appropriate data, and have your body of work tested to the broader scientific community, not just YouTube stuff. But I digress. What I'm trying to say here is that I learned to carve my own path as a researcher, as a designer, by looking at the field through a lens that was different and to some extent unique. Secondly, and more importantly though for this talk, I also learned that older adults are not really your most stereotypical players. And because of that, I would say that the professor didn't necessarily give me bad advice at the time. They were just being practical. As you don't want to waste your time on a research topic that's impossible, right? So that quote, that was actually pretty fair back then, I would say. And looking back, certainly quite a few things happened to the field of games and aging since 2004. For example, the Nintendo Wii and Wii Bowling happened. Farmville and social media happened. There were brain games and Patrick Stewart promoting games. And, this was before gamification and mobile devices brought games into everybody's lives. And all those events have had some major implications, I would say, for the field of games and aging. But more importantly, none of them really changed the narrative much because, well, academic publications on the topics have risen quite a bit since then, but academic publications are not really what makes the game industry go around. And the game industry's relation to older adults has not really changed in the past 50-ish years. To most developers, this topic is and has been somewhat of a niche, and it's not paid that much attention to. However, I'm going to state that this is the beginning of a change. I would say 2020 really was a change. It might have gone by largely unnoticed because it was, well, a quite terrible year. But when it comes to games and aging, I would say that the game industry might have seen a turning point, a so-called watershed moment, if you will, for games and aging. Now, to explain that statement a little bit, I'm going to have to start debunking some stereotypes, some preconceptions, and some myths. So I'm going to start with some low-hanging fruit here, the demographic stereotypes. And I'm going to look at the one from the earlier quote. Older adults don't play games. It's still pretty much a niche, right? Well, to answer that kind of question, my colleagues and I are typically relying on public market reports as we commonly cite industry sources such as the US-based Entertainment Software Association or the International Software Federation of Europe. For example, in this graph here, I'm comparing the percentage of gamers that are over 50 in the US according to ESA, and the percentage of gamers that are between 55 and 64 in Europe according to ISFA. Aside from the many age gaps that you see on there, during which nothing was really reported on 50-plus-year-olds, we learned that the US had an early lead, but that relatively speaking, the EU has caught up by now. Now, if we take a closer look at that, we'll see that at least 10 years ago, it was really hard to compare European countries. And there's a market study by Newzo as well that said it's about 15% of gamers that are over 50 worldwide, even though that number has dropped a little bit as they added more countries to the survey. Finally, I also found some data for Asia. Gamma Data reported that 4.4% of gamers are over 50 in China, which is actually a quite high amount because it's just such a large audience of gamers. So needless to say, these are a lot of 50-plus-year-olds playing games. For example, in the US alone, the ESA is talking about 240 million players in total. So that's about 50 million players over 50. or about 30% of all 50-plus-year-olds these days that, according to the surveys, are playing games. Now, before I continue, for anybody out there who plays games or is a student of game design, let me illustrate that a little bit clearer. I'm talking here about an audience, right, that is so large that if you only take 3% of them and you have them play the same game on any given day of the year, you will push that game to the top of the Steam rankings. Only 3%. So that is how big this audience is already, and it has quite a lot of leverage, really. So I think that I've debunked a stereotype there. It's no longer uncommon for older adults to play. This is a big audience, and obviously this is not going to change anytime soon either. Let me show you why. This is what our age pyramid looks like right now, and this is what it's going to look like by 2050. Notice how top heavy that becomes? Well, that's because by 2050, about a fifth of the world will be over 60, which is about twice the amount it is today. So it doesn't take a PhD to see that the amount of older gamers is only going to increase. But since I already had one, I figured I might as well look into that. So in 2015, I did some projections using data from the Pew Research Center, which is a nonpartisan think tank, and the United Nations Census. And I drew up some scenarios, but my best case scenario indicated that there could be around 105 million 50-plus-year-olds by 2045. Now, that included a number of other variables as well. For example, would people that were playing when they were 50 still play games when they were, that were playing when they were 40, still be playing when they were 50? I was carefully optimistic there, I would say, but still I was confident enough in this number that I pronounced it to the world at GDC 2016. So where does that stand today now that we're a couple of years down the road? Well, I work with AARP a lot these days as they've also become interested in this. And similar to the Entertainment Software Association, they also found that there were already about 50, well, they say 51 million 50-plus-year-olds in the US in 2019, which is still currently their latest data that they published. But how is that prediction looking then? Well, mathematically, if you look at those numbers, we are on track to hit about 142 million 50-plus-year-old gamers by 2045. And that's what you can see on the graph here. The bottom line is my most careful prediction. The one in the middle is the one that I just mentioned with 105, and the red one is the mathematical one. And yeah, things are looking even better than what I predicted 5 years ago. So the future will really tell us how these things actually progress, obviously, but right now it looks like gaming in later life is only going to grow. So I feel that it's time to debunk another myth with this. I'm sure that some of you are wondering, who are all these older players, right? Well, if you're thinking that, this is a technology-oriented topic, so this is probably predominantly a male audience, you'd be wrong. There are a lot of older women playing games right now. In fact, the majority of the studies that I talked about earlier had an equal or higher amount of female 50-plus-year-olds playing. And both the ESA and the NUSO study that I mentioned as well reported this, along with some other studies. So this has been published quite a few times, but I still find a lot of people to be surprised by that. So actually, I feel that's another myth that I can debunk about older players. The majority of older players are women, not men. So does the media represent that appropriately? Well, if you look at how senior gamers are presented in the media, a lot of the times you'll find pictures of people playing Wii bowling, like the ones that I found on the internet last night. Because Wii bowling has been really big in retirement communities in the US, and you'll find hundreds of pictures of older people playing Wii bowling if you look for them. And yeah, there's a lot of women in those pictures, but they're all white. So is that representative? Well, not really. The AARP looked into that as well, and they found that high percentages of the African American and Latinx communities play games, relatively higher amounts of people than Caucasian people, actually. So even if you struggle finding pictures of them in the media, you want to think of a very diverse audience when you're thinking about older players, which is what you should have been doing all along, because if you take any recent study or a recent Pew study, actually, we've seen similar trends for teenage players as well. So I can debunk that one as well. The older audience of digital games is not just Caucasian, it's a very diverse audience. So with such a large and diverse audience that is still rising every day, why is the game industry not taking notice? Why aren't we talking about this more in the industry? Is it because older players don't really spend money on games? Is that it? Yeah, the money. I forgot about the money, really. AARP did some research on that as well. They looked at how much money 50-plus-year-olds spend on games, and they found that 50-plus-year-olds spend about $7 billion on games in 2019. So to put that into context, that would mean that the 50-plus-year-old gaming revenue in the US alone is 7 times the size of the esports revenue globally. So to give you an idea of how little hype games and aging actually gets in comparison to something else that's getting a whole ton of hype, like 7 times is a lot more. So this is perhaps one of the biggest preconceptions that I will debunk today, to be honest. Older adults, according to ARP at least, have been spending a good amount of money on games. And that story is getting around the industry pretty well too at this point. A few months ago, I got into a conversation with a AAA company that made a war game that is considering to do a documentary on this topic. They have so many older players in their player base. Or if we're talking not AAA, but indie games, Games for Change, Genova Chen of that game company, known for games like Flower or Flow or Journey, he was talking about how they had a surprisingly large group of 50-plus-year-olds for their latest game, Sky Children of Light, even without doing any actual marketing towards this demographic. So the industry is really taking notice, and they're starting to include older players in their plans. Just look at the annual facts about the game industry, a marketing publication that ESOP publishes every year. And when I say marketing publication, actually, I mean, this is probably the most read publication in the industry. Now, in 2004, the older player in this publication was just a single percentage hidden away somewhere. Like, you really have to look for it. 17% in 2004. Now, that's stayed like that for quite some time. In fact, for 7 of these reports since then, over, 17 years, they weren't even mentioned. But in 2019, however, for the very first time, the same annual report put in a full-page spread on games and aging. And last year, 50-plus-year-olds did not get 1, not 2, but 3 spreads. So the first time I saw this, I fell out of my chair. I mean, this is a complete 180 in how the importance of the older market is communicated in what is probably the most read industry publication of them all when it comes to marketing. So while this might not seem like a lot to an outsider, for me, there were 2 major things happening here. For one, we took care of a myth. Older players are of interest to the industry now, but more importantly, given how many companies read this to get insight in where the industry is heading, I would say that this could be an enormous turning point for how older adults are approached in the industry, a watershed moment, if you will, as I hinted on that earlier in this talk. However, for anyone who wants their slice of that $7 billion, there is still a lot of work to do, because while busting all these myths, I noticed something interesting, and maybe you've seen this as well. $7 billion is a lot of money, but it's only 16% of the total revenue of the US game industry. So that's actually not that big of a number. That's quite low if you consider that 50-plus-year-olds are about 26% of all US gamers. So what we're seeing here is that a quarter of the players is only responsible for about 1/6 of the revenue. So what's going on there? Well, if you look at the academic literature, the answer is right in front of you. I would say that there is a disconnect between what older players want and what the industry is offering, or at least that's what the research has been consistently telling us through the work of marketeers, researchers, and, well, I guess my own work as well. And I think I got a pretty good idea of why that is, because a few years ago, I did a literature review at some point, and I found that academically speaking, games and aging comes down to 2 categories. We ask ourselves how we can make games that are useful to older adults. And then we ask ourselves how we can make games that are usable or easy to use by older adults. And don't get me wrong here. Speaking as a researcher, this is absolutely fascinating work. I think this is essential work in relation to this audience. And it has helped my own work tremendously as well. But as a designer, though, I would argue that this is quite a limited point of view on games and aging. And that's an issue, because for serious games to do anything impactful for older players, you need them to resonate with your audience. And if your goals are just not or only about functionality and only about usability, you're missing the point. Listen, for example, to how Frank Lantz defines games in his 2014 GDC talk.
And games are the aesthetic form of thinking and doing. Interactivity, thought and action, decoupled from actual purpose and experienced for its own sake, so that we can indulge ourselves in it, understand it, reflect on its myriad different forms, looking for meaning and beauty.
All right, so I think this is a really essential point to remember when making games in an academic context. While games can be very functional, as Frank Lantz puts it, they're not just tools. They are emotionally moving. They're thought-provoking art forms that we typically engage in for their own sake, without needing an ulterior motive. And I would say, from all the research that I've done, that's true for every age group. Here are a few clips to support that point that I edited of older adults that I didn't interview myself, but that are extremely similar to the participants of my own research.
Die God of War in 1 heb je al gespeeld, hè?
Ja, in 1 ja.
Ah wel, dit is een tweede, die is iets eviger, maar ik denk dat dat wel iets veranderd zijn. Het is met de grotere monsters en...
ja, monsters.
Ja, monsters, je zit eigenlijk je weet het in de tijd van de Grieken en zo allemaal, hè?
Van de Grieken, ja, de Grieken, ja.
En het is harder en eviger als de vorige wordt, dus je weet het, bloed, maar dat schrikt er niet af, hè, bloed. Voilà.
Ik ben 4 jaar en een paar maanden met pensioen en ik ben op het moment 64 gepasseerd en ik vind dat de meeste mensen van rond mijn ouderdom ook met jij moesten gamen.
What is this? Oh, Corsair H100i, Intel and AMD. This is looks like a coolant. I think it's a liquid coolant.
So what do you use your PC for the most?
Wow, play World of Warcraft.
How much total game time do you think you have inside the World of Warcraft?
Every day, at least. I play in the.
Oh, I think the video. Okay.
Evening, like from 6 o'clock until 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. My daughter taught me how to play WoW in 2006. I didn't know how to play with it before, and then when she taught me how, then I got, oh, this is good, I like it. I got addicted to it. Then the next year in 2007, I formed the guild.
What do you do for a living? Work for British Gas, do you? You I'll give you put my bills up. Bang, you take that. You won't put them up no more. Bang, one for you and one for you. I'll give you one as well. You come here. I'll get you come. Oh, there you are, you we finally found you. British Gas, good. I'm gonna blow you to hell. This is it, you let's have you. Oh, this is it.
Wait a minute, let me try that. What's the purpose, Michael? What's the purpose?
Chill out.
So while I'd say that all these games can have a defined purpose, it's not the essence of why older players are playing them. So maybe just looking at them through the lens of usefulness is not the key here. And the games that I've just shown you don't really look like they're all that easy or accessible either. And that brings me to one of the key points when it comes to my work. Applied game design for older demographics typically focuses on ease of use and usefulness as a response to perceived physical and cognitive decline as they contribute to major challenges for society. But guess what? Aging is not just about decline. If you look at the work of Paul Baltz or Margot van der Groot, they write about how aging is still a phase of growth, how media is still used selectively in later life to pick meaningful content, or by extension, how you can have a serious gun show as an 82-year-old woman. And with the older adults that I've been studying, I've consistently met people who are willing to overcome in-game challenges. As long as the game looks interesting to them, they're willing to learn and get better and overcome whatever you throw at them. In fact, as long as basic accessibility features are provided, I found that it's not necessarily ease of use that's the problem to getting your game to appeal or stay appealing for older adults. It's all about content and culture. Yet, the same limited point of view that I just mentioned for academia is pretty much extended anywhere else. For example, when applied games or serious games are designed and marketed towards older adults, it's typically in one of two ways. It's about brain gaming or brain training or exergaming. And that's just wrong. After all, this kind of marketing is pushing a pretty messed up rhetoric. It's a message of unrealistic material ideals. Now, that's nothing new for the game industry. If you think about pink games that are marketed towards girls, it's also just about marketing stereotypical and artificial ideals aimed at controlling a certain demographic, if you will. So as an industry, we're really doing the same thing, making the same mistakes for older players as we have been doing for female players for years. Or to put it lightly, I feel we need to do better, because as long as we, as a society and an industry, keep rejecting the frivolity of play and refuse to embrace play as a meaningful addition to healthy aging in its own right, the result is that it becomes a taboo. Diane Westwood or Lieselotte van der Leeuw have written a lot of papers on that, but I found that in my own work as well. For example, here's a quote from a 62-year-old participant in my own work who felt so pressured by her peers that she was used to referring to Matthew 18:3 to defend herself. And this was all because she wanted to play Kirby's Dream Land on her old Game Boy. So I think that's kind of dark, but it gets even worse when you realize that we are pushing these awful ideals to market games that are not really even that effective at what they are claiming to do. The consensus of the scientific community is simply that there is not enough compelling evidence to state that brain games actually work. However, people are very scared of growing older, and particularly Alzheimer's disease, so it's very effective to sell games like this. Overall, the research shows that a lot of older adults are susceptible to the idea and are looking for games that make them feel as if they're cognitively challenged. However, in my own research and by playing lots of games with lots of 50-plus-year-olds, I also found that a lot of people are not necessarily looking for brain games. There's a lot more nuance to it. You can get cognitive challenges from other games as well, of course. In fact, the majority of people that I interviewed about their experience playing brain games were lukewarm, if not negative about it. So when it comes to the stereotype that says that older adults only like brain and health games, I'm going to partially debunk that. The reality is that it's far more complicated than that. And actually, when you look at the research, older adults play a lot of different games. Just look at that spread from the Entertainment Software Association again. It'll show you that older adults play. So I guess they play card and puzzle games. That can't be right. Hold on. Maybe that AARP report has. Oh dang. Same story. So I guess that the market research doesn't show you. Does show you a very traditional player profile. In fact, some would say a bit of a stereotypical one. So does that mean that I'm finally going to agree with a stereotype in this talk? Nah. See, I've done a lot of qualitative research, and I've always seen far more variety in the older audience of games. So I'm a bit skeptical here. And of course, as everyone in academia will tell you, you want to be careful with market reports. So I looked into the sampling of these studies, and well, the sampling numbers are pretty high, but they're not ridiculously high. In fact, I have access to a study with higher sampling numbers through my friend Nick Yee, whose company Quantic Foundry does marketing for the game industry. So here are some of the games that his research found far more prevalent amongst older players than amongst younger players. So what you're seeing right now are the top 5 games per gender, with some of them appearing on both lists. So we don't have 10 of them, we have 8 of them. But if we look at the genres represented here, let me pull that up, you'll see that there is a lot more here than just card and puzzle games. And there's also a lot of variety within each genre as well. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg of his research. And it matches really well with what I've seen in my own studies. In fact, here is a glimpse of the games that were popular amongst older adults that I interviewed or played with even in my own studies. So again, you'll see that there is a lot of variety there in these games, and that is actually a very common theme in the literature on games and aging. Older adults want want a lot of variety in the experiences that they play, and in particularly innovative and meaningful experiences. So I'm going to partially debunk the stereotype that older adults only play puzzle and card games. Older adults definitely do like those games, but there is a lot more to it. Now, if we look back for a second at the slide that I showed you earlier from Quantic Foundry, you might also have noticed that there are a lot of social experiences in that picture. So does that mean that older adults are lonely and want games to help them connect to others? I mean, that's all we've heard about in this pandemic in relation to this topic, right? Well, my research has identified that connectedness and contribution are certainly key motivators to play for older adults. And if you look at demographics in general, you'll find that a lot of older adults are reporting that they are lonely. So you can certainly build a game around that theme, but there are also a lot of studies that I mentioned that indicate that the vast majority of older adults prefer to play single player games. So I'm going to partially debunk that. Again, there seems to be some differences between what I saw myself and academic studies versus what big marketing studies like ESA or AARP even have seen. But my participants, even the ones that play online, did complain about their online experiences. In particular, the female older player that I researched complains a lot about sexist remarks and a general toxic online environment. And regardless of gender, older players that played online complained about the behavior of younger players towards them, which might be why that game Sky Children of Light that I mentioned earlier works so well for them. This is a social experience where you can't use words to communicate with each other. So you don't know who the other person is, and you can't form any prejudice towards them. In any case, as designers, we want to look at more solutions, I feel, like what this game does really well, into solving that issue with general toxicity online, but also allowing people to keep some distance when they're playing with others to allow more people to play. Speaking of design, I have 3 more stereotypes actually that are more on the design side of things, because first I noticed that a lot of game designers and my own students as well seem to expect that there is one way to address older players with their work. And that couldn't be further from the truth. It might be a popular stereotype to think of older adults as being set in their ways or unwilling to learn. But if that was the case, why would I be talking about this game? I mean, just look at it. That works really well with this demographic. My colleague Julie Brown has something to say about that. This is a model that she designed for player motivation through the lifespan, and it's based on motivation to play, ability to play, and experience with games. So why do we play? What can we play? And what have we played in our past? And it shows you how older adults' gaming behavior can differ tremendously through the lifespan. Say you're a 50-plus-year-old, you just turned 50, and you've never played any games before, and then you learn about a farming simulator game on the apps or something like Farmville, I guess. You'd be in the upper left corner there. You have very little experience playing games. You don't have that much motivation. You just want to try it out a little bit. And your ability, your skill at games is limited. So that would be right there in box number 1. Now, you play Farmville or a farming simulator on the App Store on your phone, and you like it. It gives you some room for creativity, and your motivation for games that offer you the opportunity for creativity goes up. So you start looking for more games, and you go on your laptop, and by the time you're 55, you get into Second Life, a creative online experience that takes you from one area of that box to an entirely different one. Because now you have a bit of experience playing games, your ability is pretty good, and your motivation has gone up as well. Furthermore, you've also met a lot of people on Second Life because it's a social experience, so you have a lot of friends there. But then you turn 65, 10 years later, and your partner gets this severe medical condition, and you end up being a caretaker, and your time to play, your ability to play, it gets limited severely. Those people that you were hanging out with in Second Life, they're not really online anymore when you can play, but you still like playing games, and you need something to take the edge off from time to time. So you limit yourself to playing simple card games, and you end up playing Microsoft Solitaire. And so people transition around in the box, and older adults really do this a lot. In my own research, I've even over the time span of like 1 to 3 years, people could have moved around tremendously. So as designers, we want to keep in mind that older adults have full and rich lives, and being aware of past experiences can make a huge difference in generating interest into new one. So again, I can debunk a myth here. Older adults are really not that set in their ways when it comes to playing games. And motivational profiles actually change more than they do for younger players, since the context of older adults is more susceptible to change. But let's move on to another stereotype. Do older adults want simple experiences that are not too hard for them or too fast? Because that's certainly something that I've heard a lot as well. The answer to that is no. None of you have good accessibility from the beginning. And right now on my slide, you are seeing Track Mania. So this is a high reaction time racing game that's all about skill. But I played this with a 72-year-old one time, and I really, really got owned by him. He was just so ridiculously good at this, even though my reaction speed is probably slightly higher just because I'm so much younger. So the fact of the matter is, if your game is playable, if it meets the accessibility goals, older adults will play it. You just need to make sure it's accessible, and you don't need to simplify the challenge as much. In fact, older adults are just as perseverant in playing a game as younger audiences are. So we can debunk another stereotype here. It's not about making games that are oversimplified or dumbed down. And we can move on to the final stereotype that I'm going to do, which is actually about in-game stereotypes. Because if we park racial representation here for a second, which is already an issue in its own since older adults in games are typically white, we see that older adults are being represented by one of 3 stereotypes. There is the cute chibi menial task granny that needs your help or is just in the game to teach you a skill or set you on a way to discover a new part of the map. Then there's the superpowered action hero granny, shotgun optional, who is extremely strong for somebody her age and oftentimes for comedic purposes. And then finally, there is a terrifying give your old grandmother a kiss horror granny, and a lot of horror games use that stereotype. And while these are not necessarily problems in certain contexts and for some purposes, I'm not saying never ever use this, they are a very limited portrayal of aging in games. This is the only way that older characters are ever being represented. And, you know, I'm not just talking about female characters here, just to make that clear. This also applies to male characters who follow the same stereotypes, even if they look a little bit gruffier than the ones you see on the earlier slide. Because, well, I guess similar to the marketing, just having well-rounded older characters is really hard to come by in mainstream games. And I think that's really unfortunate because the research shows that when given the opportunity, older players want avatars that reflect aspects of their former lost self or that embrace their current age state. And while there are some great indie games that do that, it's not really a mainstream thing to do at this time. Although I have to say I was really pleasantly surprised at how the latest iteration of Tony Hawk Pro Skater has 350-plus-year-olds looking exactly the way they look today, instead of just putting them in the game in their physical prime, which would have been easy for them to do. But, you know, it makes sense because they're involved with the development, and skating is a lifestyle centered about self-expression. And, you know, self-expression doesn't end when you turn 50. And if, you know, real life 52-year-old Tony Hawk can still do a vert front side 180 heel flip, then I guess it would be fair to classify this as an action granny trope either. So in any case, we do need more games that represent older adults in a human way as three-dimensional personas. And I'm just going to debunk anyone who says otherwise. So anyways, those are all the stereotypes, preconceptions, and myths that I wanted to debunk today, which brings me to my big board of debunking, or rather my fact check, on all of the 11 assumptions that I addressed today. However, you might notice that I put a 12th one in there that I haven't really dealt with yet. If you're a game designer or even a publisher or marketing in games or any kind of role in the industry, does it benefit you to really embrace the older player, to target this new market? And as you can see, my answer to that question would be a resounding, of course, yes. As for one, diversity benefits all of us, but we can explore that a little bit further as well. So, in my opinion, right, embracing the older player and moving past the 11 stereotypes and really appealing to this market means that you want to do the following 4 things. First, it's about curation over coercion. You want to take the time to curate games to older adults instead of forcing them to adopt something that doesn't fit their lifestyle or interests. It's all about those pre-existing lifestyle choices, right? So it's about curation. And there are very few sites out there that do this really well. And even if you look at the App Store or on Steam, they're not real, especially I'd say Steam or an App Store on a console, they're not geared towards an older audience whatsoever. It's, you know, even the font size is typically really, really small. So there's a lot that could be done there. And just getting older adults to be aware of games that they would love is a task in its own that's not being done nearly enough. So then there's intrinsic over extrinsic. Show older adults the value of play in itself, rather than keep focusing on the potential for external outcomes such as brain training. It's an easy sell, but play is supposed to be intrinsically rewarding. So let's not take that away from it, right? And then there is accessibility over oversimplification. I already talked about that quite a bit, but you want to design accessible games that offer interesting challenges rather than oversimplifying your game and kind of losing its soul along the way. And then finally, it's about representation instead of doing the tropes. So try to provide an accurate representation that values aging rather than limiting yourself to the granny tropes. Like, it's not a problem that there is a side character in there, but it would be great if we could expand a little bit on that. So that is my high level advice on how we can move on after, you know, everything that I've discussed so far. And I think that's a great start, but I'm going to talk a little bit about what that actually looks like at a more practical level. Because if you want to take a deeper dive into the design, in my design recommendations, I would recommend checking out my 2016 GDC talk, which is freely available online and really fleshes it out a little bit. But I am going to give you one piece of advice from that talk. This is what older players really do not want from games. Instead, what you want to do is, I'd say, instead of intense violence, how about innovative gameplay? Instead of sexual themes, well, the literature talks a lot about thought-provoking themes that older adults are looking for. Strong language, meaningful dialogue. And instead of blood and gore, no, don't do blood and gore. That works, well, you know, there's always people for which something works within a demographic. But in general, you want aesthetic experiences rather. If you want to do a strong emotional experience, make it an aesthetic one rather than just blood and gore. Now, for 14-year-olds, maybe great innovative gameplay is the same as having something with a lot of violence, but for your average older adults, that's definitely not the case. And while we have a lot of great power fantasies in games, the vast majority of games, I would argue, struggle with dealing with genuinely mature themes. Just think about how the theme of loss and grief is dealt with in your average first-person shooter. So to each their own. But on average, you'll find that older adults prefer softer and smarter content over faster or aggressive content, even though there's always exceptions, like I said earlier. And that's also true for general media preferences. So what applies to TV also applies to video games there. But I've got two more comments with that. Like, first, I've got a design tip. When I'm talking about innovation and meaningful, because I've done that a couple of times already, take that subjectively. What might seem as something very common to an expert gamer or a game designer can be very innovative and clever for someone who has limited experience playing those kinds of games, or who played games 30 years ago, stopped playing and started playing again, which happens a lot with older players as well. So innovation doesn't necessarily mean that you have to reinvent the wheel here or come up with the most innovative game ever. It can just as much mean that you want to take an existing wheel and make it more suitable for this specific content or context. Second, I'm not going to say that we're not already doing this. I would argue that we have a lot of games that do this, in particular indie games. And when I curate games to older adults, I actually have this club in Oxford here where I bring 50-plus-year-olds in, and we play, you know, the games that I feel they should be playing, and I ask them for opinions, and it's all just very casual. But when I do that, it always goes really well. I mean, I give them some context, but I mean, why wouldn't it go well, right? Take a game like Papers, Please. It's a great puzzle game embedded in a social realist novel. It has the innovative gameplay, it has meaningful dialogue, it's thought-provoking, it's beautiful. And that is really why I'm so excited about this topic, because I'm not only a researcher and an advocate of and for this topic, I've been an indie game developer all my life, and I've figured that I should practice what I preach. So doing this, I decided I'm going to make a game for my grandmother. So I flew back to Belgium and I hung out with her and I talked to her about this. You know, for curation, you need to know who you're working with when you're making a game and what they like, right? So we talked for hours and hours and hours about her life. And well, I soon learned that she had a lot of inspiration for games. So we ended up making a game together rather than me making a game for her, if that makes sense, which is another way in which embracing the older player can benefit game designers. So let me show you the trailer of that game. En hoe noemden de mensen wel?
Nee?
Hoe noemden de mensen wel toen dat
Oh, die gaan de breukel. Ja, dat horen we wel. En ze kwamen binnen, hè. Maar met honderden, hè. Met de revolvers eruit. Daar is kanonnen. Alles, hè. Hier vuur. Maar wel nog leven, hè. Dat is onbegrijpelijk. Oh, wel heb je dat echt een oorlog gezeten, hè.
So that was me and my grandmother, who was 92 at the time, and together we made Brukel. So here are a couple of quick notes about that project. Well, it was released in November 2019. It has been translated to 9 languages by now, developed in Unreal Engine. I had some help from students, but it was mostly a solo project, even though my grandmother can take a lot of creative credit for it. But you know, actually building a game would have been a little bit too much of a learning curve for her, so I can't really count it towards game development. Budget-wise, about $5,000 went into it, not counting my salary, and it was released as a commercial game after about 4 years. So I would say it's not really a game that I would say is specifically for older players, but I do have a lot of fans that are over 50 plus at this point. So, and that's not too surprising with what I've been talking about, as I think it does quite well with regards to innovation, meaningfulness, and the concepts that I've been talking about. Because this is a game that abandons the heroic soldier perspective that is prevalent in so many games and replaces it with that of the innocent bystander, with the goal of sharing a very personal story, as well as building up empathy for refugees as you see what life is like in an actual war zone. So some spoiler-free notes about the design. The first part of the game is pretty much you walking around in the house that she grew up in. You have a smartphone and a list of objects that I would like you to take pictures of. And as you take pictures, my grandmother will start talking about what these objects meant to her. And as you can see right now, you can mess around a little bit with the camera settings. And well, then I take the picture and yeah, I'm not doing the audio right now, so I can talk over it, but you can see the subtitles. And my grandmother is explaining right now how that's basically the microwave of her time when she was younger. So the stories teach the player about who the main characters are of the game, and more importantly, why they should care about them. And they will learn about how much tougher life was back then, in particular for my grandmother and her sister, because they had to raise 6 siblings after her mom died. And that's what the first part is all about. It's about making the player care about the family and learning a little bit of history along the way. Now, after midnight, however, the ghosts of the past reveal themselves and the player will live through some of my grandmother's war stories. At first, a very subtle transition, and people don't even notice it until it's too late. But later on, the game has its Jacob's Ladder, Stranger Things, Silent Hill moments, if you will, kind of like what you see on the screen right now. So as Brukel's nightmare comes alive, the gameplay also takes a turn. While in the first part, players have a lot of control because you decide what you want to photograph and which stories you want to hear, the second part is about surviving and doing what the inhabitants of the house tell you to do. You'll hear these unsettling stories whether you like it or not, and that mimics how my grandmother and her sister were in charge of the household prior to the war, but during the war they were forced by the soldiers to do whatever they were told. So, of course, there's an actual story and a moral going on there as well, but I don't want to spoil that. You know, just give it a go if it's something that you're interested in. Anyways, I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the challenges of that game. First off, substantial design challenge, because everything in the game is based on subjective recollection of my grandmother. So, and I think that's super important if you're making games with older adults, involve them in the development process. So, you know, that farmhouse doesn't really exist anymore, so we had to figure out the architecture together. It was built prior to 1400 even. So we made sketches, then we made 3D models, and every step along the way, I verified everything with her until at the very end, we got her approval for it, and yeah, that was great. And the story of the game was pretty much the same thing. I actually even used data analysis methods that I originally used for my PhD to analyze the interviews in my research, to make a coherent story of all the little bits of interview that I had of her. And you know, I think if you want to do this type of game, that's really key. You want to take multiple takes of the same story, because especially with my grandmother, she can't act whatsoever. So I was kind of forced to just work off of multiple takes, because like, yeah, there was no way that I could get a little bit that didn't happen in real life. Like every story is exactly how she remembers it. So anyways, doing this thing, the results have been really great. I got a lot of press for it. It didn't get picked up by the major review sites, but the small ones were extremely positive. It went viral on Imager. It reached the top of our gaming on Reddit. And it received 5 awards so far. It got to the Smithsonian, the Akron Art Museum, and so on. So, you know, a lot of things that are really nice and not expected. And yeah, like I said earlier, it's on its 9th language by now, all by volunteers who love the game after playing it. So critically speaking, this game has done pretty well. But I think the reason for that is that it's not necessarily the game's technical artistic quality, I'd say. I mean, it's mostly a solo game. I think the reason why it did so well is because it's so good at having people connect to its main character, to the voice of a person that truly lived through an event. It's all about authenticity, really. And I feel that that's something that's really hard to find in a medium where all the characters these days are typically CGI. So to me, what made Bruckle stand out is it's a gaminising game, which is a term that I've defined as the use of gaming technology to achieve and recreate authentic first-hand oral history. And I'm currently doing more of this type of work. And even better, other people have started to follow this template with games such as Grandma Game and La Peur Bleue, which you can see on screen right now. The former is 2 American designers, and the latter is a French game design student who's, well retired by now. Sorry, graduated by now. But you know, this way of storytelling takes a lot of liberties. It never stereotypes its aging protagonist, and it allows for people to truly get to know someone that might not share the same views and culture as they do. Which is why I feel that by giving a voice to the older players through our work as game designers, which I mean figuratively, by making games that are mindful of older players, but also literally by making games that have older players' voices heard, like this game, we can make the world a better place for everyone. And that's the talk. Thank you so much, everyone.
We're all clapping behind the scenes, Bob. Wonderful job. Wonderful job. Hopefully you can hear me. And yeah, I see some round of applauses there too. Can you hear me, Bob?
You're very, very silent, but I can kind of...
Here we go. Boom.
All right, here we go.
I'm here. Okay, wonderful job. Thank you so much. People are clapping and saying thank you in the chat. Phenomenal talk, really interesting. I've got some questions, but I know some other people have questions as well. So I'm gonna please ask if anyone out there would like to ask Bob some questions. Please write them in the chat. I'd love to be able to ask him some questions. I do have a couple already that people have been asking and commenting. So, and again, before I dive into that, a couple things. I hope others feel free to type your questions or comments in the chat. Also, Ellie has posted a link to a survey. Before I get on to the next comment, a link to a survey that I'd really appreciate everybody jumping on and taking after the talk. This is both to give some feedback on the experience, but also this helps us justify why these are so important to have these sorts of talks. So thanks, Ellie, for putting that link in the chat. This other one was a comment, but perhaps you could comment on this as well, Bob. At my high school, we had a senior computer night where seniors would come in to learn how to use computers, phones, and some even wanted to learn how to build websites. The huge turnout we always had shows just what you said a bit before. A lot of people from the older generation do want to learn and keep up with the times. They just might not have the resources to do so. And you, of course, I appreciate you saying you have this club as well at Oxford. Do you see that happening around the country, or are there other opportunities to allow this generation to learn more about what we do?
Yeah, actually, let me open the tray here real quick, and I'll put one thing on the slide as well. So I'm sharing the screen again now, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. I would say this is happening in a lot of places at this point in time, but I don't have any numbers on that. Why I pull up the slide though is the following. So since I didn't want to copy stuff that was already in the GDC talk, because I think it was mentioned in the promotion for this talk, but from that presentation, I also talk about Geronimo aesthetics there, which are 6 motivations for why older adults play that are found more commonly amongst 50-plus-year-olds than with younger generations, based off of my own research and also what I've seen in the literature. And they're cultivation, compensation, connected. Well, you've read the slide by now, I'm sure. So cultivation, games as personal growth is a really big one there. And I wouldn't say that that's always necessarily learning about games. That's, games in a way that you feel it helps your life in any kind of way. It doesn't have to be learning, but learning is certainly a part of that. However, if we're looking at contemporaneity, keeping up with the times is also a really strong motivator with the audience. Just like when VR came out and I started to show off VR, like numbers went up just because I had VR gear there, and everybody's like, I would love to try that out. And just being able to keep up and talk to your grandkids or just your kids even, that you were able to do that. I mean, because at the same time, like, it's always interesting too, like you have these days, I would say up to 75. We're not even talking about old anymore in the literature on developmental psychology. Like between 50 and 75, we have this extended leisure phase in life. So, VR doesn't necessarily end there either. But anyways, so I would say, like, yeah, learning about games, about the culture on the one hand, but also learning about the technology. And as we all know, games can really help you to pick up technology. I mean, I know how to put together a computer and just build one on my own, and that has nothing to do with the courses that I've ever taken in college. It has everything to do with me playing video games ever since I was a kid, right? So, yeah, I think that's a strong motivator, and it's certainly something that we can work with to get more 50-plus-year-olds into games, or find new ways to address this demographic.
That's great. Yeah, I do think that more and more, I mean, everything you said is so true, that as these generations grow older that have been growing up playing games as well, I always joke about, like, I cannot wait until retirement. I am just going to play so many games. So I think that's really,
if you're onto me, like, the only reason why I've been doing this research for almost 20 years now is just because I want good games when I retire.
I hear you. We have another comment. Not a question, but I wanted to say I appreciate the ideas you brought up on the do's and don'ts and gaminising topics. I could see these ideas applying to all areas of diversity. You had said something like giving voice to the older players, but I could see as giving voice to other things like gender, race, culture, etc.
Yeah, so I have that thought a lot of the times as well. Like, to what extent is this something that is just specifically for older adults, or would this just work in general, right? Because, like, even, if anybody looks up the GDC talk, I mean, I can pull it off if somebody wants to see it. But yeah, my player classification for older adults, I feel a lot of the profiles that you see with older players, you can also find similar type of things with younger audiences as well. Like people who play for a sense of freedoms, people who play, to procrastinate. Like, that's a specific category for older players. I call them freedom fighters. Like, yeah, younger audiences would have that as well, obviously. So it's always a question of that, but I'm happy to see that people are not just like, oh yeah, this is just a games and aging thing. Like, the biggest point that I could possibly make about this topic is that aging is not that great of a predictor of behavior, or it's not that defining. You are truly as young as you feel, with the exception of like, okay, yeah, I you know, like I have a bad hip or something, or I have a medical condition, sure, but like, I mean, you can, you know, you can play a sport and really injure yourself at younger age and have an, you know, a certain accessibility concern for the rest of your life as well. I mean, it doesn't have to be age related, even if the numbers are a little bit bigger there, obviously. But so I think, you know, the more people look at this topic as like, this is a story of end. Like, if I want to make a good indie game, I could also appeal to this audience really well. I think that's really where I've always tried to push the narrative of this, because my entire career, it's always been about the brain gaming and the extra gaming, and I don't have anything against those, but I do feel that we can do a lot better as game designers. And actually, for what it's worth, because I didn't mention that in the presentation, but extra games have way better data in terms of effectiveness, or way better results on effectiveness than brain games do, I would say. And I think it's very unfortunate that we haven't seen a Ring Fit for 50-plus-year-olds at this point yet, because Ring Fit is pretty great, I feel, but it also feels very childish. And, you know, you can be into that or you're not into that. But for example, for my in-laws, it was like, no, this is too childish, even though they love the interaction, but they wouldn't play the game or complete the game. So there's definitely an opportunity there with extra games, I see. And with brain games, I think the big thing is that it's always non-players where we see the big results. When people who don't play games start playing games, we see a lot of cognitive benefits. But when people are already playing a lot, they're a lot smaller to notice those benefits. And to really tie it into neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, it's just, we're really not there yet. But I mean, I'm not an expert at that, and I don't claim to be an expert. I'm just repeating, you know, what I read in papers and what some neuroscientist friends of me have told me about that topic, obviously. But so like, yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity there if we can just park that for a bit and just go into like, okay, I'm making a great indie game already. What can I do to make this better for older populations? Or if you're like, I'm looking for an idea for a great indie game, why not do what Bob did with his grandma and just, maybe I just start with an older audience. What would they like? How could I do something different? Because it worked out really well for me, and I think for, you know, some other people in the future, it's going to happen as well. Like, anyways,
that's great. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Bob. We'll end there because I know we're hitting up against time, but I know that you've planted seeds, I think, in a lot of young designers' brains, and even some older designers' brains as well, about how to move forward with our design decisions, not just in games, but in all the different things we do in art and design here at Stout. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I know you got to speak with some of our game design students earlier today too. So it's been wonderful having you visit us virtually today. And I wish you the best of luck, and thank you so much again for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Dave. And thanks so much for everybody who showed up. This was a blast. If there is anything for which you would want to contact me later on, just send me a message on Twitter or something like that, and I'd be more than happy to take any more questions. Or if you want me to look at a, you know, if you're a student and you want me to look at a game concept or something, I'm more than happy to help you guys out.
Cool. Thanks, Bob.